Hello and welcome to a special interview for VIT Today. We have with us Dr. Jayaprakash Narayana. He's, as you know, a former civil servant turned politician, founder of the infamous Lok Satta Party and the movement. He is a former member of the Legislative Assembly in Andhra Pradesh, and we're glad to have him since he loves interacting with students. I hope we have a great discussion with him. Thank you so much, Dr. Narayana. Thank you so much for joining us today morning.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Sarthak.
Question, but just to start things off, where do you think India stands in terms of its political climate in today's day and age? I know you have answered this to quite an extent, but just to kickstart the rest of the discussion, if we could get a quick opinion on what do you think, where do you think we stand in terms of the COVID, in terms of what's happened in the last 1 year, in terms of current affairs? Do you think we're headed to the right direction? I remember watching a lecture you gave where you said in India, policies take a long time to implement, so politicians think of a shortcut and people are unsatisfied. So could you perhaps start this conversation by giving your opinion on certain current affairs, and we'll get into a conversation on that?
Let me make two very quick points. The first is about democracy itself. If you look at democracy and identify democracy with voting and protest and shouting, we are a robust democracy. People vote in droves, and there's so much celebratory atmosphere, and there's sloganeering, intense political competition, and so on and so forth. And the moment the government is elected, from next day onwards, we launch protests and murdabas and rasta rokos and hartals and others. And you in Bengal probably are more familiar with that than many parts of the country. But democracy does not mean only these two things. They're necessary. The right to vote and the right to protest are necessary. But democracy is much more. It's also about rule of law. It's also about empowerment of citizens. It's about self-correcting institutional mechanisms. It's about decentralization of power. So mere liberty and vote are not enough. So I think we are a flawed democracy, and we haven't really figured out where we're going wrong and how to set it right. The argument is not against democracy. It's about recognizing the flaws in a democratic system and make it work for the people. Ultimately, we have a governance system to make it work for the people. If you look at the contemporary context, a few developments or non-developments, they give us an idea of what's happening. First, the positives. We have the capacity to address short-term challenges in a military mode. We are good with the mission mode. A flood, how to manage the flood. We are reasonably good. We're not extremely good because, after all, we are a poor country, our technology is still inadequate, etc. But despite those hardships, in an earthquake or a flood or a cyclone or something else, we're okay. We are not too bad. Major law and order problem leading to rioting and how to control the crowds, we're not too bad. While sometimes our weapons are crude, our methods are too many people die in the police firing and all that. But in a broad sense, maintaining order, etc., we're not bad. Conduct of elections, we're not bad at all. Actually, we do pretty well. I'm talking of conduct of elections. I'm not talking the electoral system or the political discourse. The mechanical process of conduct of elections, we are pretty impressive in this country. VIP visits, Prime Minister, Chief Minister visits, pick and span. Some people call it another form of disaster. So like disaster relief, this also we are actually pretty good. But go outside of that, go into normal governance, getting people what they deserve, what they're entitled to with their money, because that's the purpose of government. Government is there to make things happen, which cannot happen through our individual efforts alone. These are the collective goods. Our life, our future is determined by us and by our families. But there are a lot of things which are outside our control. There we are very bad. In imposing a lockdown, in enforcing it sometimes brutally, we were pretty good in this country. But in actually building a healthcare system that addresses the challenges of the people, making it accessible to people, and ensuring quality health without out-of-pocket expenditure, we have always failed, and we have not even now thought about what to do. Even today, there's no serious discourse utilizing this as an opportunity as to how to really make a quality healthcare system accessible to people without out-of-pocket expenditure. India is the worst in the world among major countries, not one of the worst. The worst in the world among major countries. I'm saying this with great pain. This is not something to be proud of. I'm saying this only to arouse us, to inform us and to encourage us to look at changes, because significant changes are possible at a low cost. Similarly, this is an opportunity now that COVID forced many of the kids, both in higher education and school education, to stay at home. And now that a recent education policy, and a pretty decent education policy, has come about, and I completely endorse it, it's an opportunity for the governments at the state and union level now to take a hard look at where we have failed in education and utilize this time, because this does not require any effort on the field. You don't require thousands of people on the roads. To utilize the opportunity now, how do you dramatically improve the quality of outcomes in a society where the demand side is very strong? The evaluation system, the way you communicate the learning, and accountability systems, and so on and so forth. There's no serious effort going on like that. Some things are happening. As I said, education policy, I welcome it, because the crisis is now converted into opportunity. But you must make it happen. The 3 laws in agriculture, I completely support, because they're basically expanding the choice of the farmers and expanding the choice of farmers who are the most benighted lot in the country. Long-suffering lot, 50% of people depend on agriculture. They only share about 15-16% of the national income. And unless those incomes are enhanced, unless they have opportunities in agriculture and outside, there is no way you can really make a serious dent in poverty. But these are very small but important steps. A lot more needs to be done. Similarly, you take many other areas. We require significant changes. And I think some things are happening, but not enough. We are just doing enough to sustain. We're not doing enough to really improve significantly.
Right, sir. So let's try. You made 2 very important points: the basic structure of a democracy, the federal structure of India, and the healthcare system. And I wanted to understand the importance of the two. I remember watching your talk, I think at Google, where you spoke very vastly about the role of state and the federal structure in India. Do you think the federal structure in India is in jeopardy due to the concentration of power to New Delhi, and especially the center trying and overruling the authority usually given to state and the independence given to state in terms of decision making? And do you think that's affecting the basic policies in terms of healthcare, in terms of education, and the much important roles policies that you brought out in your answer before? Do you think that's an important relation that we must talk about?
The short answer is no. Because if there's one area where there's significant improvement in India, now I have talked to you about some of the many obvious failings, but there's one area where there's significant improvement in India over the past 30 years, not one day, not 1 year, not one government's term, but about 30 years or so. It is in federalism, at least insofar as union-state relationship is involved. Because while we conceived of a federal state, truly federal decentralized state, because of the partition and the mayhem and bloodshed accompanying partition, our leaders lost nerve, and they created a quasi-federal, actually substantially unitary structure. But happily, in the past 30 years, several developments have taken place. Initially, the architecture itself is in place. The 7th schedule clearly delineates the functions of the union and the state. So constitutionally, whatever the union wants, beyond a point, they cannot intervene. You mentioned healthcare. Healthcare is a state subject. While there are some areas like education, health, medical education, other things which will be obviously nationally driven because there has to be some uniformity, etc. Most of healthcare is in the state. Education, while it's a concurrent subject, most of the expenditure as well as most of the real delivery is in the states. Therefore, the architecture itself is very sound, but we have perverted many things over a period of time. Article 356, division of resources, union and state, and all kinds of problems. And the license control Raj, which centralized everything and therefore forced the individual and the provinces to go to Delhi and beg before them. All these things happened. But last 30 years, many of these things have been reversed. The 14th Finance Commission and earlier 10th Finance Commission onwards, a significant improvement in the resource transfer to the states in a non-discretionary manner. Article 356 became a dead letter because of the Supreme Court judgment in the Bombay case. The license permit Raj was significantly, substantially dismantled, and therefore people have economic freedom and choice, and states now can actually compete for investments on their own. They can have their own policies. It's a robust environment has come, which is very good. And the absence of monopoly of a single party at the national level, while BJP is now increasingly becoming an influential party in most parts of the country, but the kind of monopoly that we had seen until about 1984 or so in the country, of one party dominating everywhere practically, that's not there in the country since then. And therefore, the political compulsions are driving federalism. So I think in many ways, in a broad sense, I don't think federalism as union states is in danger, but there are two issues. One is the personality of the national leader, because whatever you do, the union government and the prime minister of the country are going to be very important in terms of inspiration, leadership, and guidance. If the personality is seen to be very authoritarian, very centralizing, very personality oriented, there is a feeling that authority is slipping from the states. It's more a feeling than substantive, because there is no constitutional change and the states still are masters of their own destiny, and union and state have to work together. The second issue is federalism is not merely about union and states. True federalism is about subsidiarity, Sarthak. It's about you sitting in Kolkata, or I sitting in my apartment complex here, or somebody else in a village or a town, exercising greater and greater measure of control over their lives locally. That is true Swaraj. That means the community of stakeholders actually has the power after the family. That means if the stakeholders alone cannot handle it, then a small local government, then a slightly larger tier of local government, then the state. Now, unfortunately, the third tier has never been allowed to evolve. And what existed was actually destroyed. You take Kolkata city, the city where you sit. In 1924, the great Chittaranjan Das, Deshbandhu Chittaranjan Das, he became the mayor. At that time, they called him, I think, the chairman of the municipal council or something, mayor of the municipal corporation of Kolkata. And when he met the British officials, they praised him because he was already a great national leader. And they said, Mr. Das, is there anything that we can do for you? He said, there's nothing particular, but the people voted for us. Our council has to now respond to the people's wishes and deliver. Therefore, I want to have my own chief executive officer, the municipal commissioner of the corporation, of the city. They were a little surprised, but Calcutta was the jewel of the crown, the biggest city in the British Empire. And therefore, for the locally elected chairman of the municipal council saying that he will appoint the commissioner, is a little surprising. They said, no problem, because of the stature. They said, no problem, but you choose any ICS officer, we'll give you that officer. He said, no, I don't require officers. I'll appoint my own person. They were taken aback, but they dared him to appoint. They thought, no, he would anyway fail, and how can they deliver? He looked around and appointed a 27-year-old youngster to be the chief executive officer, commissioner of the municipal corporation. This youngster did a remarkable job. Over the next 9 or 10 months, he acquired a great reputation among the people, the elected corporators, the members of the council, the British officials, and the British government. He was jailed, this official, young official, for reasons unrelated to the functioning in official capacity because of his participation in freedom struggle. He was put away in Alipur jail in Kolkata. Das again went to the British officials and said, you allowed me to appoint my commissioner. He's doing an outstanding job. You jailed him for an extraneous reason. I don't know what you do, I don't care, but he shall continue to be the commissioner. The British government gave an extraordinary order. They said this young man will continue to be the chief executive officer of Calcutta municipality. Even in jail, the files will be circulated to him. He will pass orders. The orders will be implemented as if he is an officer on the job. That actually continued until that young man was shifted to Mandalay jail. That happened during British India. Today, Kolkata city or any other small town, let alone a big city, can they claim that they can appoint their own chief executive? Can they'll govern themselves and the state will not interfere? And that young man of 1924, he became the mayor of Kolkata in 1929. He became the president of the Congress movement in 1939. He became the founder of the Azad Hind Fauj. It was Subhash Chandra Bose. So we are nowhere near that. We have perfunctory local governments, and there's a fanfare in elections, but they're utterly disempowered. They're inconsequential. The third tier is decimated in India. And without that, democracy cannot flourish. There's no way young people or ordinary citizens can play a significant role in shaping events or in making decisions without local governments being effective and people being empowered. And that is the real challenge to federalism, not union-state relationship.
Right, sir. But so the growing roles of regional parties, I'll come to that question a bit later. But this playing devil's advocate here, if I had to just put in retrospect what's happened in in this current year, central state relation has become worse because due to the GST issue that recently happened. This center was supposed to pay a certain amount of money because of GST filings and weren't able to because of less collection, even though promised. That was one black mark on the relation. Although I completely agree that the competitiveness between states has increased, and we saw that as an advantage when we passed the Farmers Bill and we tried to kill the monopoly that 2-3 states had in the agriculture sector. But in retrospect, do you think these cases are still very important and should be analyzed, even though even in education sector, when the center passed a rule where a certain language had to be used, a local language had to be used for teaching, rather than leaving it to a decision to be made by the state government or the local tier 3 government, why was that decision made at a union government that made it that much harder for the state and the tier 3 governments to implement that very rightly written education policy? So what would you say to that?
Sarthak, we are combining many issues. Let's take 2 or 3 issues you mentioned systematically. You take GST. Actually, GST is a remarkable success of federalism. In operational terms, there might have been problems. Increasingly, experts believe it should have been rolled out with greater deliberation, a little more forethought. But everybody agrees that the concept is sound. But basically, all states consented after 20 years of intense debate and discussion. All parties and all states were taken on board. And the constitutional guarantee was given that on the assumption of a certain assumed growth of revenues, if there is a shortfall in any state, that will be made good by the union government, and a separate fund is created for that. Now, the current crisis is a unique one. Globally, all economies came to a standstill, and India is one of the worst affected in the world, and therefore government revenues went for a toss. And therefore, there is a shortage. But even then, the government of India was wrong in saying that, no, you figure out your own devices and you borrow. And I'm happy to note, recently, I think last week, out of the 216,000 crores of rupees dues to the states as of a certain date, about 50%, 110,000 crores, the union government said they will borrow and distribute to states as per their entitlement, which is a good step. The rest of the money, they left it open. I think that also the union government must take the responsibility. So I take this still as one of the hiccups in the short term, and in a very complex and vast country and diverse country, and a multi-party system, remember. We don't have even 2 parties, we have multiple parties across the country. In each region, one party or the other is playing a significant role. We have this tug of war. Now, I'm not unduly disturbed by that as long as we have basic constitutional architecture. You take, for instance, the case of language you mentioned. I find absolutely nothing wrong in the policy enunciated by the government. I am a great champion of decentralization. My record bears that out. I have been the strongest voice for a long time, probably after many great Gandhians are no more, like Lakshmi Chand Jain and others, my great friends. I am probably one of the few people left standing with extremely strong views about decentralization. What the policy is saying is, to the extent feasible, the child in the first few years of life, educational life, must be taught in a language that the child understands. It's an academic issue. World over, there's no debate at all on this. It's absolutely given. Only in India, we think, my God, it's a terrible thing. Imagine you and I are discussing. Now, you grew up in a Bengali-speaking family, and your Bengali probably is, because you grew up partly in Dubai, you may or may not know Bengali very well, but you perhaps know a little bit of it. I don't know Bengali, sadly. Though some of the Sanskritized words perhaps I can follow. It's a beautiful musical language. You don't know Telugu, but we are able to converse in English. Let's say you have invited a Chinese scholar to talk to you. And he is an extraordinarily brilliant person with tremendous insights, knowledge, expertise, wisdom, and guidance. He is communicating with you and all the viewers of this in Mandarin language. Who is benefiting from that? What are we learning from that? However wonderful that wisdom is. A kid that does not understand English, being taught in English is exactly like, somebody is speaking to you and me in Mandarin. We have no clue what he's speaking, and we're pretending that we're learning. It's an academic issue. India has bungled very badly. It's not a language issue. It's not about emotional mother tongue kind of stuff. No, it's not a cultural issue. It's about academics. World over, this practice. Now, Mahatma Gandhi, way back in 1916, at the time of inauguration of the Banaras Hindu University, while he was addressing, he said, look, by forcing at a very tender age, teaching in a language that the child does not understand, the young people in the most productive or formative years of their life are losing 6 years of their life. So we must take it beyond center-state, union-state relationships. We must look at our children's welfare. In that sense, that policy is absolutely bang on target. And even there, the policy does not say the state shall do it. They said as far as practicable, please, first few years, let us teach them in language that the children understand. Let's also teach English language, if English is not the language in which they are taught, and progressively make it bilingual and then make them proficient in English. I think that's the absolutely right and scientific way. So I don't think everything is a federal issue. We are trying to complicate issues. I don't accept that. I'm a great champion of federalism, but we must have a nuanced approach, what we're talking about.
Right, sir. So I'm glad you brought up the farmers issue, right? And granted that the farmers bill is a very important reform that the agriculture sector required, and perhaps in 10 years we'll realize how important it was to introduce private players in the market. So, but something very controversial happened in the Rajya Sabha when this farmers bill was passed. Perhaps something that the parliamentarians would remember for a very long time to come. What do you think that says to the country when you see the member of parliament getting physical or
Uh,
demonstrating in such a manner?
I fully understand. We, the Telugu-speaking people, cannot forget even now what happened in Parliament when the Andhra Pradesh state was divided. I don't want to dwell on that in any detail. We have a lot more to do to improve the process of deliberation in the legislature chambers, whether state or national. And we have to have much more decorum, and there has to be a greater sense of democracy and consensus building and logical, rational arguments. I don't want to go into that. But if you look at the farmers' bill, let's take it as an example. There are three things. We must separate each one. We must not mix up the issues. The first is the policy. Is it right or wrong? I have said repeatedly and on camera, and I unhesitatingly say, as a champion of federalism, as a great supporter of decentralization, as a friend of farmers, who has for a lifetime fought for the interests of the farmers with some success, modest success. These are the right things, and there is nothing wrong with them. They are necessary, but not sufficient. This is not El Dorado. This is not a revolution, but this certainly is necessary. It expands the farmer's choice and options, removes the monopoly, gives a greater chance of access to the market and better price realization. But a lot more needs to happen. Retail chains to compress the market chain, the storage infrastructure and pledge loans, processing, entry into the export markets, and a whole lot of other things are required. But this is small but important step forward. The second is the way it's done, the parliamentary practice and the legislative mechanism. As I said, it can be much more elegant and more democratic, but there's a larger issue of our democracy. The way debate is debased, and on both sides, the people in government, they think that they can write roughshod because they have numbers. People in opposition think that irrespective of public good, their duty is to oppose and oppose vociferously, sometimes irrationally and anarchically, both on the roads and in the legislatures. Both approaches are wrong. There's a third issue, and that is the federal issue, the union-state relation. Some people are raising that issue also. Again, this is a power unjustly exercised by Government of India to restrict the farmers' choices under various laws. The fundamental right of the farmers and the people is under Article 19(1)(g) to practice your own profession, trade, business, or whatever. We are all free. We don't require Mamata Banerjee or Narendra Modi or somebody else to grant permission. It's our life. This right, this power over ourselves is taken away by an extraordinary provision under Article 19(1), price controls, etc. Now, the union government, which has restricted my freedom, has now said, I'm sorry, I no longer restrict. Or I restrict only occasionally. I take away restrictions. It's not an issue of federalism. It's an issue of fundamental rights. The states' rights are not taken away. The citizens' rights taken away are now restored. I think we have to have a much deeper understanding of these debates, these issues involved. This shor machana and sloganeering without understanding the substance, that will not lead us anywhere. We must be much more cautious about our pronouncements. When freedom is restored, like for instance, the license permit Raj earlier, economic liberalization, what happened? Our right to practice our profession, trade under the same Article 19(1)(g) was taken away in a misplaced sense of policy, where private sector is seen as bad and evil and competition is seen as totally unproductive. And the government said, sorry, we are mistaken. We are letting go of these restrictions. That was right. So this is exactly a corresponding part in agriculture. We have to look at the issues. So I think there's much more balanced thing. There is a lot that is wrong in the country. For instance, I'm completely opposed to the notion that a legislation adopted by the state can be stopped by a governor and then reference to the president at will, or simply kept in the dustbin. For instance, I'm opposed to the notion that a governor can be appointed by the federal government, an unelected governor imposed on an elected government in a democratic society. It's completely wrong. I'm completely opposed to the notion there must be uniformity in the country. There is no reason why the union government and the state government, local government must be governed exactly in the same way. The constitution need not be overburdened. I'm completely opposed to the notion that the local governments in Bengal, how they're elected is decided by the Constitution of India. We have overwritten the Constitution. These are the real issues of federalism, giving us the choice to decide, to experiment, to innovate, to improve, to learn from each other's lessons, practices, and mistakes. That we have denied ourselves. Unity is not uniformity. So I think we have to have much more robust, much more nuanced, much more intelligent debate on federalism, rather than this political slanging match.
Right, sir. So with this, I'll come to my last question, and I think we are also falling short of time, but we'll make it quick. The next election, or perhaps the next big election that will happen in India, do you see a rise of unified regional front? It's been long since a lot of the regional parties have tried to collectively fight the election due to whatever reasons, but we have seen great examples of coalitions, the NDA led by Vajpayee ji, UPA government, but we have also seen the bad side of the UPA government when the nuclear deal went south, right? So there are two sides to the coin, but do you think today's political climate calls for a regional collective action due to the other national party, which is supposed to lead the country against as an opposition, is falling short? Just your quick remarks on the perception here.
Sarthak, our polity is very complicated because we call ourselves India and there's one nation and citizenship. We're assuming that all polity of India is uniform in the country. When we look at the polity of India, we must look at it as Europe, 20, 30 nations. You take Bengal. Bengal political fight is different from Karnataka political fight, different from Maharashtra political competition. So I believe that monopoly of power by any party all over is not the right thing. I believe there must be real competition and there must be real choice. I do not know if there will be a formal coalition, but I think in each state there's intense competition for power. There's no state where any party's monopoly goes unchallenged, whether it's BJP or earlier Congress or some other party. And as long as the interests of these regional parties do not conflict, there obviously will be collaboration. Whether it will be a formal collaboration or not, it does not matter, as long as they all have a unified approach to larger things. But unless we focus on the issues, unless we tell the people of India what we fight for, what is the alternative vision, if it's merely an alternative face, alternative flag, alternative symbol, alternative party, I think people are sick and tired of it. That is where the problem is. If one group of people is replaced by another group of people, but the game of power is exercised exactly played in the same way, it's only a change of players, but no change in the rules of the game, then the people are marginalized. That's why you see a certain reluctance on the part of the people to oppose even a political monopoly of any single party. The way Congress monopoly was opposed in 1975, 77, and later, or later, 89, and so on and so forth. That's not happening now because people have become wiser. How does it matter whether you are in power or they are in power? I don't care. Tell me what is it that makes a difference. Don't tell me it makes a difference to your fortunes. I think our political system, those in power, those out of power, they have failed to do that. Clearly tell us what they're going to do on education, healthcare, job creation, infrastructure building, rule of law. There's no rule of law in the country. On paper it is there, but in reality it doesn't exist. So tell me how my life is going to be better. What is the precise thing you'll do? What are the obstacles and how are you going to remove them? Where are you doing it? Even today, I think that the main challenge of India is the parties that are opposing the government in power, while their opposition is genuine, it is sometimes passionate, oftentimes it's chaotic. There is absolutely no idea where they're headed, what they want to do. Mere naysaying is no good. You must provide very coherent, clear, alternative set of policies. Treat people as intelligent. Respect them. Don't treat them as a bunch of a flock of sheep, and I give some slogans and they'll simply follow me. And that's where I think we are as a country.
Right, sir. So with that, we come to the end of this interview. I'm glad we did this conversation. Perhaps I would call it a debate rather than a conversation. I'm glad we did this, and I hope we can do this again really soon. And I think once things get better, I hope we can have you at a university. I think you've gone to the ISB. I think I saw your speech at the ISB, and that's when I really wanted to have you come to our university, but we couldn't figure that out earlier this year. But I'm sure maybe next year or a year after that, we can perhaps have you down for a guest lecture here. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today. I'll just close
Thank you,
the
Sadak,
recording.
for having me, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much, sir.